Mike Dewine took a break from celebrating the made-up fake holiday of Kwanzaa to veto House Bill 68. Now, this bill would have prohibited doctors in the state from prescribing cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers to children. The bill also would have prohibited boys from playing in girls' sports. Now, it passed overwhelmingly in the Ohio House by a vote of 62 to 27, and in the Ohio Senate by a vote of 24 to 8. And these are margins that are so large that they'd allow the legislature to override Dewine's veto, but he went ahead and vetoed it anyway. In a 30-minute press conference the other day, Mike Dewine explained his reasoning, such as it is, and I'm going to present Dewine's arguments as thoroughly as I possibly can, so that you can see all of his reasons for, and hear all of his reasons for vetoing this bill. He is just parroting trans propaganda, and for the most part without even questioning it. And we know the only way to stop this insanity is to confront it. So here it is. Here's the first key claim that Mike Dewine made during the press conference to justify his vetoing of the bill. Listen.
Were I to sign House Bill 68, or were House Bill 68 to become law, Ohio would be saying that the state, that the government, knows better what is medically best for a child than the two people who love that child the most, the parents. Now, while there are rare times in the law, in other circumstances, where the state overrules the medical decisions made by the parents, I can think of no example where this is done, where it is not only against the decision of the parents, but also against the medical judgment of the treating physician and against the judgment of the treating team of medical experts.
What a just pathetic, gutless rat this guy is. So Dewine begins with a variation of a common argument you hear from trans activists, which is that parents always know what's medically best for a child. Now, of course, trans activists don't actually believe this. That's why they want to empower school districts to hide children's so-called gender identity from their parents. It's also why they're allowing minors to take these sterilizing drugs without parental involvement in states like California and Washington. Because, by the way, if parents decided, if there are plenty of parents who have a child that falls into this trap, this cult, and the parent makes the right decision and does not take the child to be castrated, and in those cases, the trans activists, and presumably Mike Dewine, would say that, no, this is abusive. So, no, we should trust the parent's judgment if the parent makes a judgment that is in line with trans activists. That is the qualifier that Mike Dewine forgot to mention there. But even if Mike Dewine and trans activists actually did believe what they're saying, which they don't care about parental rights at all, the argument still fails. And that's because common sense and our basic human moral intuition tell us that chopping off a healthy girl's breasts or castrating and sterilizing a boy for life is not only wrong, but a moral atrocity that cries to the heavens for vengeance. Yes, parents have a right to raise their children. They don't have a right to abuse their children. We all understand that. They don't have a right to mutilate them, which is abuse, obviously. Doesn't matter what the parents say or what the doctors say. Some things are wrong because they're just wrong, regardless of your title or position or your relationship with the child. Now, this is an obvious point, which is why Mike Dewine tries to head off the argument by saying that, in this case, parents and experts agree that these procedures are medically necessary. And he says he can think of no other example where the state has banned procedures on children where both parents and medical experts agree that they're necessary. Now, this is a remarkable statement from the governor, given that it was less than a century ago that children were getting lobotomized in this country. Parents and medical experts thought that lobotomies were a great idea, so they happened at scale. Walter Freeman traveled around psychiatric hospitals in the U.S. in the 1950s, sticking spatulas in people's brains. It's like, it wasn't all that long ago. The medical experts all agreed that this is the best way to treat any number of ailments. One of his patients was a 12-year-old named Howard Dully, who was lobotomized because his mother demanded it. Medical expert, parent, both agreed. Several decades later, Dully told NPR, quote, "I'll never know what I lost in those 10 minutes with Dr. Freeman and his ice pick." Now, lobotomies aren't performed in this country anymore. Many states have imposed restrictions on all forms of quote-unquote psychosurgery. And any doctor who performs a lobotomy would probably be bankrupted in a malpractice lawsuit, if not sent to jail. But Dewine has apparently forgotten about all of that, and he has absolute trust in parents and doctors. I mean, they could never be wrong. If they agree, they can't possibly be wrong. Anything they agree on must automatically be legal in the state of Ohio, is what he's saying. Now, what's interesting about this argument is that, as Dewine himself points out, these parents have given their reason for opposing the bill, and their reasons have nothing whatsoever to do with medicine or science. Watch.
Ultimately, I believe this is about protecting human life. Many parents have told me that their child would not have survived, would be dead today, if they had not received the treatment they received from one of Ohio's children's hospitals. I've also been told by those who are now grown adults that but for this care, they would have taken their life when they were teenagers.
So Dewine begins by saying that parents have told him that they had to transition their children or else their children would have committed suicide, which is not a medical judgment. That is, at best, a parent acting out of pure desperation and caving to the worst form of emotional blackmail imaginable. And like most judgments made out of desperation, it's a very bad one. Now, for one thing, as I've pointed out 1,000 times, the claim that children need to be transitioned in order to stop them from killing themselves is belied by the fact that for most of human history, no children were transitioned, and also no children were killing themselves because of it. It is only in the last few years that this need has arisen, which means that the need is an illusion. We have to destroy the illusion, not give in to it. But Mike Dewine has no problem with this. He says that because he met with a handful of parents who tell him that sterilizing hormones save their kid's life, that he's convinced they must be right. And what's extraordinary about this is that at the beginning of his press conference, Dewine claims that he talked to detransitioners also, and people who regret getting these hormones at a young age. He never explains why he disregarded their concerns and sided with the handful of parents that he spoke to. In Ohio, they're legalizing, or he wants to legalize, the sterilization of children based on a handful of selective anecdotes. That's where we are. This gets even weirder when you listen to the rest of Dewine's press conference, where he explains that he has no data at all to suggest that sterilizing children actually improves their well-being. Watch.
Number one, I adamantly agree with the General Assembly that no surgery of this kind should ever be performed on those under the age of 18. I am therefore directing our agencies to draft rules to ban this practice in the state of Ohio. Number two, I share with the legislature their concern that there is no comprehensive data today regarding persons who receive this care, nor independent analysis of any such data. Therefore, I am today directing our agencies to immediately draft rules to require reporting to the relevant agencies and to report this data to the General Assembly and the public every 6 months. We will do this not only when the patients are minors, but also when the patients are adults. Number three, I also share the legislature's concerns about clinics that may pop up and try to sell patients inadequate or even ideological treatments. This is a concern shared by people I spoke with who have had both positive experiences and those who have had negative experiences with their own treatments. You know, when you look at this field, the first thing that you figure out when you kind of dig into it is there isn't a whole lot of data of what's going on specifically in Ohio. We need to know that, and frankly, you know, over time we need to have longitudinal studies as well. So we have, you know, but there's some information that we can get immediately, and you know that's what we need to do. We need to start getting, you know, who's getting this care, how many come in, how many start the process, how many finish, how many go to this, how many go to that, just data.
So we have no evidence to suggest that any of these treatments are helping kids. The governor admits that. In fact, we have a lot of evidence that it's hurting them, as he says. And that's why Dewine doesn't want to authorize surgeries on minors, even though he also said before that parents and doctors are the ones who make decisions. And there are doctors out there who say that minors should get the surgeries. So in that case, you are admitting that the doctors can be wrong, you moron. But at the same time, he's fine with legalizing procedures that will sterilize children against the will of the people of his state, even though he acknowledges there's no science to justify it. He's greenlighting child butchery by his own admission so he can collect more data on how it affects children in 20 years. So let's just castrate the kids now and check in 20 years to see if it worked out. That's his argument. It's so ghoulish and so completely illogical that it's hard to believe it's real, but that's what he said. So if you're a sane person, you're left wondering, what could possibly explain this? I mean, it's always worth laying out the case against the medical abuse of children, but we all know that Mike Dewine doesn't actually need to be told any of this. It's well established. Dewine is a contemptible weakling and a pathetic coward, but he's not actually psychotic. He's only pretending to be in this case. And the question is why? I mean, why is he telling legislators to scrap this bill following his veto in favor of some vague administrative regulations that mean basically nothing? The first answer probably has something to do with the campaign contributions that Mike Dewine receives from the very organizations that perform this butchery. The Daily Caller is reporting that, quote, from 2018 to 2023, the governor received $40,000 from the Ohio Children's Hospital Association, Cincinnati Children's, Nationwide Children's Hospital, and ProMedica Children's Hospital, all of whom support transgender medical care. Now, these are the same children's hospitals that, in his press conference, Dewine said he had consulted before vetoing the bill. So he had to consult with his donors before making a decision on this. But the governor never discloses the donor part of it during the press conference, so that's conspicuous to say the least. There's also the fact that under Dewine, Ohio has resumed working with Centene Corporation, even though they just settled with the state on charges that they defrauded Medicaid. Various local news outlets have pointed out that one of Dewine's longtime friends is a lobbyist for this organization, which incidentally also claims that gender-affirming care, quote unquote, is medically necessary. Is this corruption? Well, undoubtedly it is. But it's also not a complete explanation for what we're seeing in Ohio. This is, a cancer that spread far beyond one governor's office. Dewine represents the Republican establishment. An establishment for the Republican establishment will always do the bidding of the LGBT lobby when push comes to shove. And we've seen that all over the country repeatedly. Obviously, there was the gay marriage debate where the right folded virtually overnight, or at least the establishment Republicans did. There are many more recent examples. There's the case of Spencer Cox, the Republican governor of Utah, who recently introduced himself to a room full of children by giving his preferred pronouns. In 2021, the Republican governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, vetoed a bill that would have banned men from competing in women's sports. That same year, the Republican governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, vetoed a bill that would have banned so-called gender-affirming treatments on minors. The state legislature later overrode that veto, but that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. And for the sake of thousands of children, we need a similar veto override in Ohio. But that can't be the end of it. Because if the leaders of the conservative establishment want anyone to believe that they can conserve anything, they should start by explaining why Bree Fram is allowed to lecture us in uniform about the importance of hiring mentally ill cross-dressers. Then the Republican Governors Association should explain why so many governors are ignoring what the vast majority of their constituents want. If the leaders of the establishment right can't do any of that, and honestly they probably can't, then they serve no purpose. They are every bit as spineless and pitiful as Mike Dewine. And if there's any resolution worth making in 2024, it's that we need to be done with these useless cowards once and for all. Now let's get to our 5 headlines.